Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this new seminar, which is being organized. It's titled Weekly Invoicing Office Hours. So it will be a short one. It's only half an hour, but it will be running every week. My name is Vlad Skibanov, and I'm VAT partner with Dhruva Consultants. With me today, I have Diana Cesares, who is a tax technology director, and tax technology expert with Dhruva Consultants, who is very experienced in invoicing implementation and talks to the UAE government daily on the topic. And also we have Kamil Zekovsky, who is a chief technology officer for Oxinus Holding, which is a global invoicing solution provider. For those of you who are not aware, Dhruva Consultants and Oxinus Holding will be partnering in order to provide invoicing solutions in the UAE. But just to take a step back, the purpose of today's session is not simply to inform you about the invoicing which will be coming in. Many of you would have already participated in similar seminars and may already have quite good insights regarding the invoicing regime. And while part of the session will be taken by giving you a snapshot and reminder of what invoicing rules will be, the main purpose and chance and an opportunity to express any questions or any views in this particular forum. Because constantly when we talk to our clients about invoicing, about implementation, they have questions regarding what it means for their processes, what it means for their invoicing, what it means from all different aspects of their business. And today we have a forum for you to ask those questions. So it's meant to be more interactive. Please do use the chat box to ask whatever questions you may have. And we will aim to respond to it today. And if we don't have enough time today, because we keep the sessions only to half an hour, then we'll continue in the subsequent sessions. So, for example, next week. One thing to note as well is that there are still certain uncertainties in respect of invoicing in the UAE. We're waiting for legislation concerning the invoicing specifically. We also expect certain changes to the VAT legislation, telling us when we need to issue invoice, when potentially you don't need to issue invoice, because as many of you may have been aware, it has been announced that going forward, electronic invoice will also be required for out-of-scope and exempt supplies. But we still need to have legislation, to see the legislation, to get confirmation in what circumstances it may be required or not required. So again, if the question arises where we still do not have the certainty, we can go back to the Ministry of Finance to check with them what is their potential intention, or the Ministry of Finance will itself publish this information going forward. And this is something what we can then discuss in subsequent sessions. All right, without further ado, I will pass on to my colleagues, to Diana and Kamil, to take the session forward.
Thank you very much, Vlad. And this is introduction, and this is the first invoicing hours that we have dedicated for the UAE implementations. And yes, feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions you might have. So to start with, what is electronic invoicing and why it is being implemented? So electronic invoicing is basically, they have two parts of this, is e-invoice and e-invoicing. The e-invoice is the document represented in a digital structured manner. It's very easy. Doesn't have to, from now on, when electronic invoicing will be implemented in the UAE from 1st of July 2026, so there will be no more PDF or manual invoices. So all invoices will be in XML, and the e-invoice is the process to convert the data in a digital structured format in XML. So the mandatory implementation 1st of July 2026, and all entities in the UAE will be under the scope of electronic invoicing for issuing the invoicing, receiving invoices for B2B, business to business, business to government, and government to government invoices, irrespective of the VAT registration and threshold. Sometimes there are a lot of questions if what happens if we are operating in the free zone or mainland. Is only the invoicing will be only mandate for companies who are operating in the mainland. So the answer here is irrespective where you are operating, free zones, mainland, you will be under the scope of electronic invoicing. So now, Camille, let's talk about the paper, the system and the model what is going to be implemented in the UAE. Camille, we are going to under very advanced stage of the accreditation process. So if we can share with us more of the model and people and how the businesses can interact in this workflow of the electronic invoicing.
Thank you, Diana. So in terms of invoicing globally, there is a couple of models. There is a direct model, there is a centralized model. And in Europe and here in the UAE, we have adopted PEPL, which stands for Pan-European Public Procurement Online. This is a model based on DCTC standard, which stands for Decentralized Continuous Transaction Control and Exchange. Basically, for each transaction, you will see that there is it's a common name for it is a 5 corners model. For each transaction, there is 5 parties involved. First party is a supplier who sends an invoice through accredited service provider, which is a corner 2. This invoice is received by corner 3, which is accredited service provider of the buyer, and then essentially acknowledged by the buyer. In corner 5, which is the last corner, is the government, which will receive a simplified version of invoice, which is defined by a format, it's an XML format, described by Pint. And this is something that we will be discussing in the further session. Just to let you know, this session is for us to share the information that we have and the current progress and the process, but it's also for you to ask questions to fully understand what's going to happen in the next coming months until the e-invoicing will become mandatory in July 1st, 2026. So from a technical perspective, every single invoice that is B2B or B2G will have to be synchronized with the government.
Yeah. So there is one question here. It's regarding the identification of the tax with the electronic invoice from the tax authority's perspective, Camille. So how the Ministry of Finance will identify the electronic invoice? They will have a unique identifier. So as service provider, when the seller will share with you the data to generate the invoice in XML, what is the mechanism for the Ministry of Finance or Federal Tax Authority to identify the invoice?
So yes, the invoice will be sent to the government and will be given a unique identifier, and then through PEPL network will be sent back to both seller and the buyer and saved in the system.
Okay, so basically you have, similar to Saudi, you will have a unique identifier for each invoice that will be provided by the service provider, right?
Yes.
Okay, under the invoicing model, we have 3 main documents, which we will see in this flow. The documents are invoice business documents, which are tax invoice, credit notes, self-invoice, and self-credit note. So then we have tax data document. Tax data document, which is called TDD, you will see in the flow, and we are going to talk about this a little bit later. Basically, this is a subset of the electronic invoice that it will be shared with the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance doesn't need the complete electronic invoice. And the reason why is because sometimes between seller and buyer, they need to attach documents, they need to any specific other information that is only for commercial purpose. So this information is not really relevant for the Ministry of Finance or Federal Tax Authority. So they will ask for a specific data, which is a subset of the electronic invoice. So then we have an MLS. MLS is the message level status, which is a response that they will have from FTA to the service provider to when they receive the invoice. And also we have a TDS, which is the tax data status that will be only shared by the service provider from the buyer if the invoice is negative. So this is something that we need to have in mind when you call about TDD, MLS, TDD, and TDS. So during this flow, we have the seller. The seller, you can create your invoice in your ERP system, or you can share the data fields with the service provider. The service provider, they will perform some checks if the format are correct, and then convert the invoice in an electronic invoice in an XML format, and then they will share it with the service provider from the buyer and also from the FTA, the tax data document. Once this is done, so we will receive the message saying from the FTA that acknowledgement that they received this data. Consequently, the service provider from the buyer, they will check the invoice and share it with them, with the buyer. And also, if you just go a little bit more, Camille, so the service provider will share the tax data document with the tax authority, and they will receive an MLS. At the end, the FTA will provide all this data to the FTA platform, which is a tax repository. If you go down, Camille, please. More. So they will have a central data repository, which is going to be all the data collected from electronic invoices, and they will be able to perform analytics and provide some audits in real time, which is going to be developed in the future. So, and here there is a question. So, unlike Saudi, there will be no stamp of FTA. The FTA only will receive and record. Camille?
Yeah, according to the latest documentation, it doesn't require approval of the government. It's just for the record of the government.
Okay, so this is something that is not the same as Saudi. It's not clear as model. They will only receive the data and they check if it's according to the format, but there will not be a stamp from the FTA, which is clear. There is one more question about this electronic invoicing mandate. Here, will electronic invoicing impact the VAT submission process in any way, Vlad?
Yes, obviously electronic invoicing may impact processes. We see people using different type of procurement systems, different approval mechanisms. Often in a business scenario, an invoice may be sent to a recipient and recipient will disagree and send it back. Obviously, currently in this type of situations, the FTA would not have that information. The FTA wouldn't know that the invoice was issued. So people often then change something behind the scenes. Going forward, this will not be possible. So once a tax invoice is issued, the FTA will have the information. Therefore, to make any changes to invoice which was already issued, you would need to issue electronic credit note, which will also then go to the FTA. So the FTA has records that the transaction did not happen. And therefore, when people are thinking about invoicing and processes, they need to think about what other steps must happen either within the ERP or in direct communications with the recipient before the tax invoice is actually issued. So if you need to do any approvals, you may need to get approval before invoice is issued, because once it's issued, it might be too late to simply withdraw it. Similarly, we see sometimes big organizations using portals to issue tax invoices, and it might be portal which is accessed by the purchaser, by the buyer, to issue invoice to the invoice portal accessed by the supplier to issue invoice to the buyer. Again, this type of process will need to be evaluated and potentially changed going forward, because now everything has to go through accredited service providers.
Thank you, Vlad. Yes, this is very common with the platforms, and there are a lot of rejection of electronic invoicing. So before sharing any data and with the service provider to generate the electronic invoice and to avoid rejections, so you need to have a specific business process, update the business process with a third party. Communication is a key before implementing the electronic invoicing. So Vlad, there is one question about if B2B company also do B2C transactions, will it require to issue to an electronic invoice?
So the first phase of implementation of e-invoicing will not include B2C. It only covers B2B, B2G, and G2B, G2G. So between government and businesses. It does not cover business to customers type of transactions, which does mean that if your business, which is conducting both B2B and B2C transactions, you will need to run essentially two systems of issuing and receiving invoices in parallel, because it may apply only to some of your invoices, but for B2C invoices, you may still be using the way to issue tax invoices you're doing right now, which obviously makes it a bit more complex. But the expectation is that it is temporary. It's just the first phase. Eventually, maybe in a year and two, it will also be expanded to B2C type of transactions. And then we'll have a mechanism regime when probably all your information gets pre-populated into your VAT return.
Thank you, Vlad. Here, Camille, in terms of data transformation, there is another question about comparing the model of electronic invoicing in Saudi Arabia with the UAE. So in Saudi, there is a requirement to display the text in Arabic. So this will be, as part of the accreditation process, is one of the requirements to display the text in Arabic as well. And the businesses need to do this type of data transformation when they are in the process of implementing electronic invoicing?
So as far as I'm concerned, as per the last document, there is, there is general legal requirement in the UAE related to language, but there is nothing specific to synchronizing invoices with the government system.
Okay. Yes. So basically, there is no requirement to display the electronic invoice in Arabic as Saudi, because this is not as per the UAE legislation. So there's another question here regarding if free zone company selling the goods to mainland company in UAE, will free zone, this is more for VAT instead of of electronic
Yeah, the
invoicing.
question
You want
is,
to answer
will
that?
free zone company need to register for VAT? It's a VAT question, not invoicing question.
Exactly.
But the answer is it depends. Certain transactions within a designated zone may be outside the scope of VAT, but there are some set conditions for it to be outside the scope of VAT. So if free zone company only makes out of scope supplies, then it doesn't need to register for VAT. But again, this depends on your exact scenarios and on your on contractual and other type of aspects of transactions.
Okay. Thank you, Vlad. In terms of the deadlines for adoption of electronic invoicing, so the first, yes, so just to be more clear, normally tax administrations and governments, they roll out the electronic invoice in a phased manner. Some of them, they roll out by type of by revenue, the largest entities, some of them by sector, It depends of each country. For UAE, the rollout will be in phases. There will be not many phases like Saudi. We are expecting a few, 4 to 6 phases. And the first phase, which will be announced by the end of this year, which are the companies, the profile of the companies that are going to be live by 1st of July 2026, will be announced by the end of this year. So there will be the first phase. We are expecting the large entities, starting with the financial institutions, but we need to wait until the announcement from the Ministry of Finance. So yes, there will be phases, but not as many as Saudi.
And then just to confirm, then the first phase is July 2026, but the announcements about the phases will be by end of this year.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what about advance receipt from customers on signing of any agreement and it still work yet to start? Do we still need to issue an electronic invoice, Vlad?
Yeah, so electronic invoice is expected to be issued in all the same circumstances in which it would be required right now. So if you're receiving advance from a customer at the moment, it's probably one of those periodic continuous supplies under the Article 26 of the law. So you have multiple dates of supply, and you would already be required to issue a tax invoice at the moment. So we would also expect it to be the same going forward. You will still be able to issue electronic tax invoice. It will be for that particular payment. And then for any subsequent payments you're receiving, you'll be issuing tax invoice as well.
Thank you, Vlad. Here there's a question about out-of-scope transactions. Do we need to issue an electronic invoice for out-of-scope transactions? So basically, for electronic invoice is not only related for VAT purpose. You can use the invoice for commercial purpose and for tax purpose as well. So even you don't need to report certain transactions in your VAT return. So the tax authorities and the Ministry of Finance want to cover every single transaction that is performed by companies. Also, that's the reason out-of-scope transactions, exempted transactions, will be under the scope of electronic invoicing. And with this type of transaction, they will need to issue a commercial invoice. And the rest of transactions for VAT will be issue a tax invoice. So the answer is yes, these out-of-scope transactions will be under the scope of electronic invoicing.
So yeah, if I can just supplement this one,
Yes.
It will be a different type of electronic document as commercial invoice, not a tax invoice. And while currently you're not required to issue any type of invoice for that type of supply, which is out of scope, in the future you will need to issue some document. But as I said at the very beginning, what we need to know exactly is the exact scope of the requirement, because Ministry of Finance announced it will be a requirement, but will it, for example, be required for suppliers within the same VAT group? Will it be required for dividends which are outside the scope? Or are we talking some other out-of-scope supplies which will be covered? So for that, we need to wait a bit longer to see the announcement.
Thank you, Vlad. Here there's a
Nabil, about the reconciliation, right? Given that the invoicing will enable real-time exchange of billing data among sellers, buyers, and FTA, will the FTA reconcile each taxpayer's monthly or quarterly VAT returns with the billing data already received? I think there is no mentioning at the moment about automatic reconciliation.
But yeah, well, what's expected, of course, that if FTA is getting this information in real time about your B2B transactions, it will use it in some way or the other. So it will be tracking, let's say, your VAT treatment for those type of transactions, seeing if it all makes sense, maybe tracking how it changes from month to month. Are there any flags which may potentially make FTA question what you do, maybe start an audit. So yeah, it might not be able to do the full reconciliations against your VAT returns, because obviously invoicing does not cover B2C transactions. So The information will never be complete, but it will use that information in one way or the other.
Yes. So yeah, thank you, Vlad. So one question for Camille. Did Oxenes is ASP service provider, and you will be assisting in businesses to implement electronic invoicing. So how is the and how far you are in the process of accreditation as
Yeah,
well?
so we do have a solution. It's called uae.einvoicing. It integrates with most popular ERP systems on the market. So it's pretty much seamless in terms of the integration. We're in the last phase of getting accreditation from the government. And yes, of course, we're also assisting in this transition to make it easy for businesses to be compliant with the requirements by the government.
Okay. Yes, we will share all the details from Oxynes with you, with Ramesh, that we can help with the implementation. In terms of, will it mean that even other income or whatever revenue generated, the invoice will be compulsory for B2B companies? So yes, the answer is yes. Anything that generate income, you need to issue an invoice for tax or commercial purpose, and will be under the scope of electronic invoicing. There are more questions here. Will companies subject to e-invoicing be still required to submit VAT returns, Vlad?
Unfortunately, yes, for now. So yeah, you will still need to prepare your own VAT return. So even though the information will be going to the FTA, and FTA will have data about your B2B transactions, you will still need to continue doing your VAT return. But as I mentioned earlier, once invoicing also extends to B2C transactions, then the FTA should have all the information about your outputs. So B2B, B2G, B2C. So then the expectation would be in the future that at least your outputs can start being pre-populated into your VAT return. Obviously, the same could also apply to your inputs, but it's a bit more difficult because inputs are not always fully recoverable. So you'll need to make adjustments, if you're one of those partially exempt entities. But eventually we'll get to the environment when most of the information should be pre-populated in your VAT return. And eventually, who knows, maybe we will end up in a system when you don't need to submit any VAT return anymore. It is all done automatically.
Thank you, Vlad. And so this is the last question because we are running out of time. Since there will be a connection while creating the B2B invoice between buyer and the seller, will there be a rejection system? Do you have some insights, Camille?
Let me answer it. So the rejection system is supported by PEPL, and it can be built in, but it's not required by the government to have it implemented. That means you can use a system that supports rejections, and you can use a system that doesn't support rejection, means all the invoices will be automatically accepted. PEPL itself and the PIN format, the standard format that will be accepted in the UAE, does support rejections.
Okay, thank you. I think there are so many questions that we, yes, Vlad?
No, I didn't say anything.
Okay.
But I mean, if people are still here, maybe we can pick up another, I see 3 questions. How about the foreign purchases? So for the foreign purchases, initially the information published by Ministry of Finance was that you would also need to issue electronic tax invoices, as you would be required to do right now manually. So you're required to issue tax invoices for your supplies, imports of services and goods, unless you fall under the exception. But subsequently, that particular part of the Ministry of Finance FAQ on their website has changed. So now it seems to indicate that you will not need to issue electronic tax invoice for your imports. So as of now, you're not required, but let's see if anything changes again.
Okay. So currently, which accounting software are authorized to do electronic invoice. So currently, the Ministry of Finance has not announced any service provider because they are all in the process of accreditation. We don't know which accounting software will be accredited, but the list of the service provider will be on the Ministry of Finance portal. So this is a little bit different compared to Saudi, which they publish who is going to be willing to be compliant. But here, the list of service provider list authorized by the Ministry of Finance will be authorized by them, and we can only select those service providers which are on the Ministry of Finance portal. So there is another question about what will be the role of a tax advisor during the implementation of electronic invoicing?
It's still important, right? So obviously, a lot of role to play during implementation will be your IT team and technology team. But still, the solution itself, it's important to remember, will never will not be verifying whether or not the VAT treatment is correct. It will be verifying whether or not the information which is required to be on a tax invoice is there, but it will not verify whether or not the treatment itself is correct. And therefore, what we would normally recommend for anybody who is now planning to do invoicing implementation is to also consider, do you need to review your tax treatment of your transactions? Because once it is implemented, as we discussed, the FTA will be receiving information about your business real time. So you want to make sure that is correct. And obviously, during the implementation, your tax advisors who are currently working with you, they probably have good knowledge of your processes, of the way invoices are issued, when you issue tax invoices, in what scenarios you don't issue tax invoices, but maybe it's out of scope. And therefore, they can also advise you what will be covered by invoicing process, what will be covered by electronic commercial invoice going forward, and so forth. So they are not obsolete. They still have an important role to play to make sure that you're compliant going forward.
Yeah. So I think we covered the majority of the questions, and if we left any question unanswered, we will be able to provide answer next week at 4 p.m. every Thursday. We'll be here to support, and I hope this session will be was useful for all of you. So we can continue the conversation next week. Vlad and Camille.
We hope everyone enjoyed the session and you find it useful. Like Diana said, we'll be here every week to try to answer all of your questions to the best of our knowledge and make sure that we're all ready for the upcoming changes.
Great. Now, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Diana and Camille, and thank you for people who joined and participated. It is the whole purpose of this is to keep it interactive and discuss rather than keep going through the same slides, which you may have seen many, many times. So we hope you enjoyed it and see you next week.
Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.